Hello everyone, my name is JALILEH GARCIA and today I will be talking to you about gold mining in Honduras, which is my home country. So I will start presenting now by sharing my screen. So today I will be speaking to you about understanding extractive mining in Honduras and the impacts that this has on organized community resistance. So gold. I'm sure that you all have seen gold, have heard about gold, or have had maybe some of you own a piece of jewelry that is made out of gold. So we also have other objects that are not as, we don't recognize that they have gold in them. So I don't know if any of you have an iPhone, have a Huawei, or have a Samsung phone. If you can, maybe one of you over there in the other side of the screen. If not, I'm sure that you've used a computer before. So all of these things, what they have in common is that in order for these to actually work, they need to use some bit of gold. Now, that doesn't mean that they use, a big chunk or big nugget of gold, but it does mean that gold is in these different systems in order for them to work, right? And so that's really important for you to keep in mind. Now, I will not be speaking to you about just exactly how much gold is in here, or how you get the gold in here, but I will be speaking to you today about the way in which the extraction of gold from the places where it naturally occurs or naturally appears, what happens in these processes of extraction of gold, right? So we can think about that process as extraction, right? We can think of it as extractivist. And what this means is a socioeconomic process that relies on the availability of land, labor, which we can think about as workers, and capital, which we can think of as money, and which requires the large-scale removal of natural resources. In this case, we can think about gold, we can think about copper, we can think about silver, we can think about many others. And these are usually then exported as raw material, right? So in order for you to use a computer, for example, well, this particular part of the computer requires that there's a piece of gold. So we're going back to the very beginning of that process, which is the extraction of these resources from the very ground that they're in. Now, I'm going to take you to Honduras. So this is a country in Central America. Again, like I said, that's where I'm originally from. I am from the central part of the country. And today I will be taking you a bit further out west to the western region of the country. That's in an area called Copán, which is the department of Copán, and an area that is called the San Andres mine. Now, in order for you to understand the context of Honduras, Honduras is a country that has dealt with lots of political turmoil in the recent decade. And this is really important because that has influenced different processes and has made it so that there's been lots of corruption in different aspects. There was a military overthrow of the government in 2009. So it has experienced kind of turmoil, and that directly impacts what happens in the San Andres mine. So I will be taking you now to kind of a video which I want you to think about. What can you see, and are there any noticeable changes? Okay, so I'm going to play again just so you can think through that. What are the changes? What can you see? Perfect. So I want you to sit there and think of, either write down or just think through the different things that you just saw. So some of your peers that I was speaking to earlier gave me various examples. One of them was deforestation. The other one was that there was an expansion of the mine they could see from the video. And another person mentioned like the loss of biodiversity, the loss of plants, of animals, can't see the animals, but you assume as much in a forest that animals would be present. Is what they shared. So this is a picture of the area that we're speaking of. This is the San Andres mine. Now, the San Andres mine directly impacts three communities the most. And while they're not, the three of them here are not named, I will explain to you where these are. So we have Azacualpa, which is up here. We have in this area a community that's called San Andres. And in this area, we have a community, very, very small community now, that's called San Miguel. Now, these are the villages that have been the most impacted by the operations of the mine. And we can think that that is because of the proximity of these communities to the actual placement of the mine. Now, these three villages are located in La Unión Copán, which is basically a municipality where the San Andres mine is located in. Now, there's various other villages in this area, but they are not directly within the proximity of the mine. Now, that does not mean that they have not been affected by the mine, as we see now that some of the further away villages are being more and more affected because the company's doing various explorations there to see if they want to expand the mine further into those areas. So this is really important to keep in mind. So the main actors I will be speaking to you today about are Minosa or Oro Minerals, which is Minosa is short for Minerales de Occidente, which is a subsidiary of Oro Minerals. A subsidiary means that it's basically so let's say you have a parent, you have a child. Minerales de Occidente or Minosa is like that child of this big company. That usually also means that in legal cases, it's much more difficult to make sure that Oro Minerals, this big parent company, actually pays for any injustice or any rights violations. And Minerales de Occidente, or Minosa, it's used as Minosa, was also previously a subsidiary of Yamaha Gold and Greenstone, which are two other mining companies that are very large transnational companies. Now, I don't know if you know what the word transnational means or what transnational implies when you're talking about a mining company. So, a transnational mining company, such like the cases with Aura Minerals, means that it's a company that has no particular place where it's based in, or a particular place where it has operations in. So that means, for example, in the case of Aura Minerals, it has a mine in Mexico, it has a mine in Brazil, it has an office in Miami. It also is publicly traded in Toronto. And also in the British Virgin Islands are some of its headquarters. And of course, the mining operations that occur in Honduras, which is the case that we're speaking about in this moment. So you can see it's very, very global and transnational in the sense that it goes beyond the borders of just one country. Now, the other main actor are the Maya Chorti people of La Unión Copán. And these are people who are the descendants of and are ancestors of the Maya Chorti indigenous community of La Unión Copán. And this is in particular people who have organized in like a social movement, in a movement of resistance against the mining operation of Minosa and Aura Minerals. Now, this is really important to keep in mind because I do not, during any of my research process, actually interact with people who work in the mines. And that was a choice that I made to do so, given the kind of the rights violations that I perceived to be occurring in the mine. That was a personal choice on my end as a researcher. So I do want you to keep in mind that what I'm sharing comes from the perspective of the people that have been resisting. Now, in order to give you an idea of what the operations have looked like in the last, in the last years, we're going to start in 1983. So here, Minosa, this mining company, is granted a concession over the San Andres mine. A concession is basically the government is giving the mining company the right to this land, right, to mine in this land. So it gives them that right, and it basically tells them this property will be yours for X amount of years. And so that happens in 1983. At this point, the mining processes were very very, very simple, right? So in this day, the mining looked very much, it was through underground tunnels, it was through kind of axes and basically through processes that were a lot less corrosive or a lot less damaging to the environment. In 1997, we see that the San Miguel community, which I had previously mentioned, has been displaced and resettled. And when this resettling of the population happened, it happened in a way that they basically gave money to people to move away from the region. And because it was a very small community, many of the people decided to move elsewhere to villages that were further away from the mine versus like in the perimeter. And this is important because something very different happens in 1998 when the community of San Andres is completely resettled. And this is all of the homes were destroyed at this point, and people were resettled into a community, into an area village that was very close to the mine, as we could see in the previous picture right here, sorry, right here. So here it says San Agustín Copan. Right here, this is where the new San Andres is located, right, where people were resettled. And then in 2002 to 2003, we start seeing that multiple cyanide discharges are happening in the Lara River. The cyanide discharges are basically a really, really strong chemical that has really, really detrimental impacts, not only on non-human life, such as animals and plants, but also on people. In this case, it killed 18,000 different species, most of them being those in the water, right? Those in the river. In 2007 to 2009, we see wastewater discharges, which is basically wastewater that comes out of the mining processes. But the issue was that these came in extreme quantities, which led to the destruction of bridges and inundations in homes. And in 2009, Ora Minerals, which is the company that will be the main actor in what I'm speaking about today, acquires the San Andres mine. Now, what that means is that it basically acquired the rights to operate within the mine. So basically, at this point, Ora Minerals, this big transnational, was able to do whatever, to do as their policies dictate for the San Andres mine. And they really started to kind of use technology in a much more aggressive form. And since 1998, really, the technology increased significantly. And in 2009, I would venture to say even more, or at least maybe not the technology, but I think as the years go past, you do see significant more technology. And also, I think also this huge plan to expand further. And that's really what occurs in 2009 is that in 2012, now several years after since Aura Minerals has control of the mine, you see that people find out that there's kind of this plan to destroy the cemetery of the Azacualpa and the San Andres community. And this is particularly worrisome because the community members perceive this as something that the mine is directly doing, though the mine shields itself, saying that the health secretariat, right, basically our Ministry of the Health, is saying that this cemetery is no longer viable. But people in the community argue that this is not the case and that simply the mining company is the one that wants the cemetery to be destroyed. So in 2014, we see that there's, protests break out, not only because of the cyanide poisoning, right? This chemical poisoning, but also in 2015, they're actively then also protesting against the cemetery. In these different processes, you see arrests happening of the people who are protesting against the mine and against the mining operations. By 2016, we see that 14 water sources, which could be like little rivers, small little ponds and areas, have completely disappeared. So at this moment, you see that an appeals is filed in court. A legal document is filed because Minosa, this mining company, is abusing, right, environmentally, socially, the community. In 2016, you see a dialogue with the community, and you see it's qualified as a dialogue, but you see that within this dialogue, There's the mining company is like very present and like very insistent use to the military, and you also see police. So many people felt as if it wasn't really about dialoguing when you have the military present, um, which is a sense of insecurity. And as I mentioned early in the presentation, Honduras has undergone this tumultuous kind of history, this really violent history, where the military actually was in charge of um, of deposing the government, which means overthrowing the government. So the relationship between the military and the people isn't great, uh, or the police. They've also been caught up in scandals. So there's this kind of fear that is instilled by the presence of the military and the police. By 2017, we see contamination of the River Lara again by cyanide. Here we see the deaths of thousands of fishes, and there's no life present, no more than human life, right? And the municipality, which many people argue that has been in favor of the mine the entire time, orders the exhumations of the cemetery within the cemetery to go forward. Now, an exhumation refers to the physical um, removing of a body and moving it to another place. So this means that, for example, the dead loved ones, you know, your deceased loved ones, are being taken physically, taken from their casket and moved elsewhere, or potentially even taken with the casket and moved to another area. And this is really what an exhumation implies, right? The physical moving of a body to another region, to another area. In 2018, the same mayor, brings the neighbors from other areas to incite social unrest and to create confrontations between the different community members. This is particularly problematic because that it already it increases tensions that were already there. By 2018 to 2019, we see that MINOSA clears the area near the cemetery and again attempts to exhume the bodies, but their court orders the suspension of these exhumations. By 2020, again, the Supreme Court orders MINOSA to cease exhumations. Despite this, MINOSA, the mining company, argues that the health secretary has been the one that wants these exhumations, and that actually that they're gonna go forward with it. So in 2022, you see a complete destruction of the Azacualpa Cemetery, Azacualpa San Andres Cemetery, and currently there's many people in the community that do not know where their families are located. For example, they say that they have been exhumed, but people do not know where. They do not know where they have been buried. They do not know where they are, and simply are in a state of shock and in a state of grief because they do not know where to grieve for their loved ones, and they do not know where their loved ones are. So, how did I do this research process? I started out first with interviews through semi-structured interviews with 14 community members that were again participating in this organized resistance in La Unión Copán. I also did archival data and document analysis. I went to the Secretary of Natural Resources and the Environment, and I analyzed documents that I received through a portal, a transparency portal, where I basically looked through old documents, documents that between the mining company and the Secretary of Natural Resources and the Environment. And this was to learn a little bit about what the historical process has looked like from the very beginning. And in the document analysis, I'm looking at basically yearly sustainability reports that the mining company or MINOSA has published. Now, I did this project through an alliance, basically with a partner organization. One of the things that I'm very, very cognizant of is the fact that, for example, I am Honduran. I am proudly from Honduras, but I am from the central region of the country. I am not from the western region part of the country, and I do not know, and I did not know the community directly. So I had been following what had been happening in the community for over, I think at this point it's been 3 years now, but I had no personal contact with the community. So I decided what would be best is precisely to make those connections with the community through another organization that has already been working with them. And that's precisely what I did. So I partnered with Estudios para la Dignidad, a bufete de derechos humanos, which is a human rights law firm that works with the community, that works to represent the community in different legal proceedings, and also the Movimiento Amplio por la Justicia y por la Dignidad y la Justicia, which is a social justice movement that supports dignity and justice within different social struggles. Now, two of the research questions, or the research questions that kind of guided me and are still continuing to guide me, are how do community members resist the ongoing operations of the San Andres mine in Western Honduras? And also, what does the Ora Minosa discourse, what is this mining company's discourse, the way that they say things, the way that they communicate things, what does that tell us about their politics around community relations? So I want to start out first about explaining thinking through resistance. And I think through these examples through resilience, reworking, and resistance, which are kind of three different things that are posed by a geographer called Cindy Katz. And she talks about resilience as the way of dealing with situations that are beyond kind of, that make sure that we just get the better outcome in a situation. So that ended up happening when I have an example from a community member that shared, my family was the last to leave San Andres to go to the new town. And this is in reference to that community that was resettled. We left because there was nothing left. The churches, the stores, the houses, the water infrastructure, everything was torn down. And when I speak to the community member, she tells me that it seemed like a hurricane had passed through. And really, for her, moving meant being resilient in a situation where there are no other options, right? Where the other option was to leave the community entirely. Reworking, another community member said that my family works in the mine and we have gotten some benefits, but have always supported the neighboring community here. And this talks about the ways in which, although the community member recognizes, for example, that she has some benefits, that she's still in support of the people that are resisting, right? So there is no drastic change in her own personal life because she has people that work in the mine and like she receives benefits from the mine, but she's also at the same time supporting those who are not for the mine. So there's that tension there. And then resistance, which is like the most typical form of resistance that we think about, is when there's kind of this push for understanding or this push for change that is emancipatory in some way. So that means it's liberating in some sense, that it leads to outcomes that are for a better future. And in this sense, another community member shared, they grabbed me by the shirt and tried to push me off a hill, speaking about workers in the mining company. Thankfully, another comrade came to my rescue. We were protesting the destruction of the cemetery. And this is really talking about how some community members actually put their bodies on the line in order to defend the cemetery, because to them that is, that is the protection of not just of their culture, but their patrimony and their past and their memories and so many things that are tied to that place. There is also refusal. When we think about resistance, there is also this element of refusal. And I mentioned this case because I think it's really important to think about the ways in which when we refuse something with a kind of this social consciousness, that can also be a form of resistance. So this community member shared, I refused to grab money from the mining company. And this is in reference to the mining company was offering money to exhume the bodies of people's of people's loved ones. So it was basically saying, oh, we'll give you 110,000 lempiras, which is around 3,000 pounds, 3,500 pounds, and saying, I believe it's that much, and saying basically, we'll give you that money in exchange for you going and exhuming the bodies of your loved ones from the cemetery. So this is what this community member said. If I grab that money, I am acting beyond the law. I have no reason to do that. That is why institutions are in place. If I grab that money, I have to compromise myself and be a part of the same destruction I'm against. It's like saying I will lend myself to go destroy the water sources and the forest. I refuse. Now, another point that we and through my suit, just the different people that have helped me in this process, but also myself that have thought through is through corpse geographies. And I know that sounds a bit morbid when you say it. But basically, what that talks about is the way in which different entities, for example, in this case, the mining company and the government has been in favor of the mining company, hold political power and really can control the ways in which people think, feel, and behave about their grief, right? And about these bonds they continue to have with the deceased. Now, in order to best illustrate that, I will put these two examples. So when we talk about policing grief, these two examples say, they took our family's remains in the middle of the night. I had my mom, my dad, my two children buried there. I didn't settle with anyone so that they could go and take them out. I still do not know where they are. They have disappeared. Nobody has answered. The government entities did whatever Minosa wanted them to do. They've always been in favor of the mining company. And we have another one that says, we cannot take them flowers anymore. We do not know where to grieve for our loved ones because we do not know where they're buried. We do not even know if they're reburied or not. The company tells us that the health secretariat knows where they're buried. But how can we trust them when they dug up our loved ones' remains at 12 a.m. without our knowledge or consent? I think this really shows the way in which now community members are being forced to think about grief and about these continuing bonds that they have with the deceased. I don't know in the cultures where you're from, but in Honduras, it's very common, for example, in November, in the beginning of November, to go to the graves of your loved ones and to put flowers and to pray for them. And that is a tradition and that is a custom that's very highly regarded. These community members no longer have that. And I think that just shows how the mining company and these governmental institutions basically use this political power to police the ways in which people feel and act for their dead loved ones. The other thing that we see is how does the discourse used by Aura Minosa surrounding the mining operations in La Unión Copan tell us about the politics around community relations. And so we think first about, Minosa says that they are a company that is, in favor of what they reference as 360 mining. Now, what does 360 mining mean? For them, 360 mining means a way to think of mining in complete terms. So thinking about how business impacts and benefits the company, the shareholders, employers, the countries and communities in which they serve in. What they're basically trying to say is that their mining company is respectful, it is sustainable, it is safe, it is responsible, and it's innovative. And I think that when we think about those things, you just heard 20 minutes of me explaining really the impacts that they've had. This is what they're going out there and telling the world. They are responsible, and that they're responsible, and that they're respectful to communities, and that they care about communities, and that they're sustainable. What we actually find is through looking at their different documents, both within the archives and within their sustainability reports, is that the company has referred to community relations and to communities in general as problems to be solved. This is particularly worrying because it basically makes communities out to seem like a problem that you can just check off, right? When I think you're talking about a community where people have needs and those needs need to be met, and people also have worries and have lives and have histories, right? And have connections to culture and communities. And when communities have opposed, the mining company has always met them with these sayings of saying, this is a problem that needs to be solved. This is a problem that needs to be solved. And I think that's very telling about the ways in which they go about doing business. One of the manifestations of this discourse is that when each person that I spoke to in the interviews speaks about the mining company buying out the community, And so what does that mean? They basically say that those people who have resisted against the mine in the past, so for example, before it used to be 36, to give you a number, and that's a number that they kept referencing. 36 people used to be against the mine and that were very, very against the mine. That number dwindled, so it decreased, and it decreased pretty greatly. And I asked them what happened there, why? And they shared to me that the mining company basically saw these people as problems, saw them as a nuisance, saw them as a bother, and that they needed to get rid of that resistance, so they bought them out. And what they meant by that is offering them jobs, giving them money, giving them properties, or some of the different things that the community members, when I spoke to them, referenced. So I think when we look forward, we really have to ask ourselves, what does justice mean in these different cases? And for example, we were talking about our phones at the very beginning. We're talking about gold, and gold is an important resource. I'm not going to say that it's not. For example, gold is used for medical equipment. Gold is used for example, I have a phone, and I have a phone that uses gold because I have one of the phones, of the three kinds that I presented earlier. But I think when we think about the fact that these are natural resources that are used, we do use them in our everyday life. How can we ensure that there's justice here? And how can we ensure that there's sustainability in these cases, right? Because I don't think any of us really want to have gold or have something that comes from a place of destruction, a place of violence. And we see in the multiple examples that I mentioned, we see a loss of cultural sites, which is the cemetery. We see that there's a loss of food sovereignty in some cases, affected rivers, environments. There's killing of animal and plant beings and life. So are these we I think we need to ask ourselves, are these happenings inherent to current modern mining practices? Is this how all mines are? Are these just, and is this sustainable? And I think moving forward, it's important, even though you might continue to buy phones and you might continue to buy gold and you might continue to buy these things. I think we always have to think through, what does it really mean to have this really advanced technology, and what can that mean for different communities around the world? So that's a case, that's a cause from Honduras, that I shared about today. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope it was informative for you.